If you have ever heard something like, just tell your mom to stop being late, or remind your dad not to forget to pick up eggs again, or I need to know what's going on over at your mom's house, then this is the video for you. And as parents, we both get why we do this. It's a way to keep our heads above water in the hecticness and busyness of life. But here's what you need to know is that little shortcut can turn your child into a messenger and put them in real danger. And the research is really clear on this. When kids are put in the middle between their parents fighting, it shapes how they in the future act and behave in their romantic relationships. Hey folks, I'm Dr. Jake. I have a PhD and my expertise is on relationships, abuse, and parenting. And I've helped hundreds of men and women on personal growth and through the relationship challenges. And I'm not sure why you're here, but I'm glad you're here watching this video. And this week I'll be talking about when kids are used as messengers and why it doesn't go well for parenting or co-parenting situations. And this is not legal advice. I'll be talking about my own professional experience and what we know from the research. And if you want to read more into this stuff, I'll put all my references in the description. So what do I mean by using a kid as a messenger? Well, this is any scenario where a kid has to communicate something from parent to parent, adult to adult, and it has even a 1% chance of going poorly, of going south. And it could be things like, ask your mom to sign this note for me for school, or ask your mom who she's dating this time, or tell your dad he's late on child support, or even watch your little brother while I give your dad a call. He's not answering again. And I want you to notice something there. Even if your tone is calm, your child is now holding adult information, adult emotions, and then adult consequences. And the kids don't experience that as communication. They experience it as emotional pressure. And this just doesn't happen in, abusive relationships. It can happen in any relationship. I'm thinking back to my childhood, and I grew up on a farm. My dad was often outside, around dinner time, working on the fence or feeding the animals or doing other projects. And it'd be my job, more often than not, to run out there and get my dad to bring him in for dinner. My responsibility to bring him into dinner. I'd go outside, hey, Pops, it's time to eat in a few minutes. Mom told me to come get you. Okay, I'm just finishing up this section of fencing. I'll be in a few minutes. Go back inside and wait and wait and wait. And if you know dads, a few minutes could turn into an hour pretty quickly. And then, dad comes back inside, supper's cold, mom's not looking happy. And me, as the messenger, now feel responsible for not getting my dad to come in when he was supposed to. Mom and dad are now fighting, and I'm stuck in the middle. And at the time, I was probably thinking like, boy, I didn't see that coming, or something like that. But that's what we have to think about is when kids are in these situations, either consciously or subconsciously, they're thinking, what happens if this blows up? Will they get mad at me? Did I say it right? Or did I make things worse? And that's the part that we really have to take seriously. So backing up now and thinking big picture, as I was writing this video, thinking about what to say, reflecting on my own professional experience, looking into the research again, is there's three sort of big takeaways that come through in the research as to why, using kids as messengers is not a good idea. And the first big problem with using kids as messengers is that pathway between childhood conflict and adult conflict and how they view the kid's role within those different dynamics. And when kids are in the middle, they're learning how to navigate conflict. And if they see children are used as a messenger, they learn that they can address conflict indirectly. They don't have to face the music, and they can sort of dance around accountability and doing the work for themselves. And as kids get older, this can lead to attachment problems. This can lead to emotional regulation issues, and this can lead to poor communication. And the second issue I wanted to share with you today is around how kids experience conflict. They're not just seeing conflict, they're not just hearing conflict, they're processing that conflict. And we as adults don't catch on that it might be impacting them until we see behaviors. And behaviors are sort of those red flags that we catch on to finally. And that could be, grades are dropping in school, or they're having trouble maintaining or making new friends. And while we can see these things, there's also a lot of stuff going on under the surface in terms of physiological stress on that child. And that's physical and mental impacts. And of course, these can have long-term health impacts as that child becomes older and becomes an adult. And lastly, the third concern I wanted to share with you has to do with the emotional security of kids. So there's a theory called emotional security theory, which basically says for a kid to have strong romantic relationships later in life, they have to have a good connection or attachment with parent one, parent two, but then also the relationship, the energetic, the emotional connection between those two people. So bear in mind, as you're working with your other parent, Even if you feel or think you're not fighting, your child becomes a bridge between the two of you. The child is learning that it's their job to manage the tension of any problems or conflicts. And that's a big old boundary problem. And that's one of the ways we as parents accidentally begin training our kids into parentification, where kids become and serve as parental roles too early. And if they start carrying that emotional role before they're developed into adults, it can have real long term consequences. And here's the rule of thumb: the way to determine whether or not a kid is being used as a messenger, and the point of this video. And that is, if the message stresses the child out so much because the kid's worried how the other parent's going to respond, poorly or emotionally, that message should never go through the kid. And even if there's a 1% chance of it happening, that message should not be relayed through the child. And I want to say the quiet part out loud here, and that is that when parents are using kids to communicate messages, it's not really about efficiency, it's emotional offloading. And what I mean is the parent expects it to go poorly and become emotional. They expect defensiveness and blame and escalation. And instead of carrying the discomfort and doing the hard thing, the parent offloads that risk onto the child. And sometimes it's avoidance, sometimes it's resentment, and sometimes it's a loyalty test. And sometimes, yeah, it's the kids being used as a pawn because whatever they're trying to communicate will hit harder coming from a kid. And now I want to talk about solutions. So if you're in a relationship, kids as messengers usually happens one of two ways. Either one, there's a really hard adult conversation that hasn't happened or hasn't been finished, and it's being avoided, and the kid's used to sort of temper that tension. And the second is because of a lack of time, and it's more efficient to have a kid communicate something. And kids pick up on this stuff faster than us adults would like to admit. And what it teaches them is subtle but powerful, and that is that conflict can be handled indirectly, and that love is managing other people's emotions, and that your job is to anticipate other people's moods and emotions and then prevent blowups, which is part of anxious attachment. So what do you do instead? Well, let's consider a common scenario that I see again and again about, transportation. So if it's an adult logistics conversation, you can tell your child, your mom, your dad, your guardian, whoever, and I need to chat. So can you go play in the other room? Don't include them in that conversation. They don't need to remember what days, what hours, when and why and where they're being picked up. And then, another scenario that I see again and again in my work is that one parent will use, or both parents will use a child as a therapist to vent about the other person too. In other words, if you need to vent about what your partner, your ex is doing or not doing, vent to a therapist, a friend, or journal, or do a voice memo while you drive, but don't use your child as a therapist. So long story short, this is one of the most important boundaries that you can set. And don't do it alone. Talk to your partner or your ex or the person you're co-parenting with if you can safely while things are good, after dinner, after watching this video, about putting up this boundary of not using kids as messengers. Because when you route conflict through your child, you're not reducing conflict, you're relocating it into your child's nervous system. So what works better is structure, baseline parenting structure for logistics. Use written channels like email, shared calendars, co-parenting apps. Keep it brief and neutral, schedule, school, medical, safety. And then don't get into the blame game, the history game, your dad always or your mom never used to do this. And then don't do character attacks. And if your ex, your partner doesn't respond, still don't use your child. Maybe in the past, when you would route things through your kid, they would respond. But that choice has its consequences, and those consequences land on your kids. So here are 3 fundamental things to remember from this video. Kids should not be carrying adult messages because when they are caught in the middle, they learn that they can operate in conflict indirectly through somebody else and not face the music. And when conflict exists, it has a real impact on their emotional security, and it can have real impacts on their health and well-being. And then in abusive situations, keep things simple and take kids out of the equation. And remember the rule of thumb. If a message going through your child would stress the child out because the other parent might react poorly or emotionally, it should never go through that child, even if there's a 1% chance. And when things get tough, when things get busy, it's often that quick and easy solution. I know I'm guilty of it. And if you have an experience or an admission of doing this, add a comment in so others watching can benefit from hearing your experience. Ending with that, you are formally invited to subscribe to this channel. I post weekly, reliable, research-informed videos about relationships, abuse, and parenting. And I recently made this video about pets in abusive relationships, so if you've heard of that in your travels, give that one a watch as well. And that's all for now, folks. Toodles.